Thank you, everyone, for showing up, and thank you, InfoSystems, for having me for this fourth time to one of these events talking about cyber stuff. That's kind of been my passion. I was, as Keith mentioned, I was a high school teacher from 1992 to 1999, and then went into the FBI as a special agent. I was on one of the original cyber squads in Charlotte, North Carolina. And did a bunch of stuff there that if you want to know, I can happy to tell you afterwards. But over the course of my career, I've seen the cyber threat issue evolve over time from guys just trying to steal credit cards to what we have now with nation state actors, cyber terrorism, pick your problem. And the thing I try to impress on most audiences I speak to is, regardless of your company, of the information you have, no one is too small to be a target. I get that all the time, or used to get that, I still do, that I talk to companies saying, well, no one wants the stuff we have, we're too small. That is completely incorrect. We all have data that is important to bad guys, and chances are all of us in this room have had our data compromised at some time. How many people lost their data in the Target data breach in 2015? Only 2. How's that even possible? I don't even know. Equifax. How many lost in Equifax? All right. OPM. All right. Ashley Madison. Anybody there? No. All right. Just checking. All right. So the key point here being, and the thing is, on all of those, you didn't lose your data. A third party lost the data that you had given to them. And I say all this because, in addition to the stuff that Keith talked about, I'm also an expert witness on 20 different data breach cases where some organization lost people's PII and PHI, and they're now being sued for it, which makes it incumbent on you as data holders to protect the data that is now entrusted to you, because you don't want to be on the other end of that company that got sued. So before I bring up the panel, because you're here to listen to them mostly, not me, this is something I talk about in almost every presentation I ever do. It is not something I created. I stole it from somewhere on the internet. I've been reappropriating ideas and information and stuff for years. But this kind of is, and you can't read it all, but these parts here I'll talk about, but this kind of lays out the threat pyramid. And regardless of the company, the business that you're in, whatever industry you serve, there are different levels of attackers that want to get to your information. So you have down here are your tier 1 script kiddies that pretty much, if you just have basic cyber hygiene, you're repelling most of that anyway. And it goes all the way up to nation state actors that, regardless of how much stuff you put in place, they're probably going to get in because they're persistent. They're going to find a vulnerability. They're going to find a hole. Someone's going to click a link, whatever. They're going to get into your system. These are very hard to repel without some of this defense, like counterintelligence capabilities, that no one ever incorporates. But that's a discussion for another day. Most organizations need to worry about up to here the organized cybercrime groups. These are the ones that do the ransomware, the business email compromise. Depending on your industry, the nation state stuff becomes much more pertinent. But I point all this out to make the point that there are attackers coming at you all over the place. Some know what you have, know what they want to take from you, and have them plan to do that. Others are just kind of spraying and praying, sending out emails to everybody and hoping someone clicks a link. And they do that because someone always clicks a link. That's the reason bad guys win. 90% of the cases I ever worked in the FBI were not because of some weird vulnerability that a bad guy was able to compromise. It's because someone clicked a link and allowed them in. So hopefully the presentation we're going to have today will kind of talk about some of those things, how to prepare for this eventuality, because chances are pretty good. There's 2 types of companies in the world: those that have had a data breach, those that haven't had a data breach yet, or actually 3. Those that don't know a data breach is ongoing and currently in their system. That's another topic as well. So we're going to talk about how to prepare for that, how to deal with it when it happens, the things to think about. Hopefully you'll have questions for the panel as we get to the conclusionary part. And I will say, being a former teacher, if you have questions during this, feel free to stop us in the middle of it, because you may think, hey, I want to ask something about that particular topic. We're going to talk about AI. Obviously, AI is, this year's buzzword. Last year it was zero trust. This year it's AI. So we'll talk zero trust a little bit, but we'll talk about AI and why you probably shouldn't be that scared of it, but you should still put things in place to protect your company on how you use it. For this chart, if anybody wants a copy of this, find me on LinkedIn or email me or whatever, and I can send it to you. It's not mine. I'm happy to pass it along. So if you want it just for an information purposes. But if the panel wants to come up, we'll go ahead and bring them up here, and we will introduce them, and we'll get into the questions as to how to prepare for the storm. The cyber storm, that is, 2.0.
Good morning. Richie Blunt. I lead a team of technical experts at Hitachi. We cover the Americas, so Canada, US, as well as Latin America. Um, Obviously, Hitachi is a data organization, so we focus more on the data aspects of recovery, resiliency, and of course, data protection. And I've been in the business since the early 90s, started at Microsoft, went to Dell, and now here at Hitachi.
All right. Thank you, Richie. Mackenzie?
Very nice. Oh, Mackenzie Brown. This is my third time here, and if I go one more time, I think InfoSystems is going to buy me a car, I've heard. So I'm just going to keep showing up until I get that free prize. Oh, 4 times. Oh, you get the car next. Okay, that's fantastic. But Mackenzie Brown, I'm with Blackpoint Cyber, the booth in the back, a one-woman show today. I am the VP of our Adversary Pursuit Group, which is our threat intelligence and threat research team that lives within our Security Operations Center at Blackpoint, because we are SOC as a service, as you may know, or I will tell you later. So I do a lot of the threat intelligence gathering with my team, research of exploit developments, and essentially helping feed that information back into our SOC so our analysts can be more empowered and stronger and more proactive. I spent 4 years before that at Microsoft. People don't throw stuff at me anymore when I say that, so that's great. I was on the detection and response team, so I was involved in global advanced adversary investigations all around the world. Anytime you see a major breach or headline, Microsoft is typically deploying their incident response team to that. And I actually came from the state government world before that. So I, grew up in help desk, IT support, network support, and policy and GRC, all the fun, sexy stuff everyone loves.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here for my 4th time. So I do expect the car. It's like, that's good. Bob Davis. So lifer in IT, I'll just say 30 plus years in IT. The last 20 as a CISO in large property and casualty, and also healthcare. But most recently, I founded a fractional CISO organization called Franklin CISO Partners, and so I'm working with just a number of clients, most of them on the very small end of the scale. So my perspective is always going to be about building and doing the things fundamentally and maturing your program. So I'm not the technical one. I'll rely on Mackenzie and these other distinguished guests. So good to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Chris Arsenault. I'm a senior solutions architect with Veeam Software. As you can imagine, we advise and help a lot of our customers protect and restore those critical workloads. And I specifically work with the Veeam Cloud and Service Provider division. So I work with larger service providers and helping them identify the right architectures and whatnot so they can protect those critical workloads. I'm also curious for the punch card for this 4 time.
You get that on the way.
Sorry,
out.
Keith.
That's at the end. All right. Thanks so much. Let's get to the first question. This first part is going to deal with forecasting the cyber storm, understanding the threat landscape. The analogy here, meteorologists track hurricanes before they hit, so businesses must also monitor cyber threats before they strike. So, Richie, I'll start to you. What are the current biggest cyber threats for 2025?
Woo. Speaking from an organization that recently had their own IT outage, you may have read about it in the headlines. Ransomware as a service is a biggie. We were actually attacked by a RAS organization, affectionately referred to as Akira. And they're pretty sneaky. I think they've actually been the most active in 2025, making up over 250 of the total attacks so far this year. I'll be happy to share with you guys kind of lessons learned and some of the things that we're providing as guidance to customers now, having firsthand experience. So I would say ransomware as a service.
So are you able to explain how they got in? That's always a
Yep.
question I have whenever I am asked to talk. The biggest issue I see in businesses that have an incident is the inability to share the postmortem. Like here's what happened, here's how it happened, and everybody else can learn from that. Especially like healthcare is a big thing. Like healthcare instances get hit, and they never come out with here's what happened, so you can all protect yourself from it. So are you able to talk about kind of just how you don't have to get into great details?
Yeah.
Don't blame out who clicked the link, but how do they get in?
So it's a really fun story. I mean, not for the folks who are dealing with the quarantine and the recovery process, but it's kind of a tale as old as time, right?
Hey, Richie, hold that up here because it blocks the. If you hold it at the bottom, it blocks. So hold it up higher up. Yeah, there you go.
All right. So, how many are on LinkedIn? Everybody's on LinkedIn, right? And what's the first thing that you do when you go on LinkedIn after you've had a life event? You tell people about it, right? And more specifically on LinkedIn, right? Those life events generally happen to do with what? Your job, right? And everybody does it for all the good reasons, right? Hey, I want to thank this organization for the 20 plus years that I've been there and I've met such great people. And I want to thank them for all the wonderful experiences. And I look forward to my next venture at XYZ, right? We all do it, right? It's a great way to share and communicate what's going on. Well, understand too, right? You're announcing to the world, right, that you are no longer with that organization. And so LinkedIn is actually one of the social feeds that a lot of the threat actors will use because you're announcing now that you're no longer with the company. And if that company doesn't have 0-day offboarding, right? We always talk about 0-day onboarding, right? Getting somebody into the organization, all their credentials, multi-factor authentication, yada, yada, right? How many organizations focus on 0-day offboarding, right? Well, you've announced to the world, I've left the organization, right? They look at your LinkedIn profile. They match it up with your other TikTok account, your Snapchat account, your Facebook account, Twitter, and they start building a profile, right? And generally, as we all do, right, the password that you used is more than likely a dog's name, the last place you went on vacation, your spouse's name, your children's name, right? So now they're taking a look at all this information, they're correlating it, they're building an index of possible passwords. And if you do not have multi-factor authentication, and if you do not have lockout blocked on unsuccessful attempts, they're just sitting there hitting your VPN access, right? Everybody knows, standard username is email address for an organization, and they just run at it. So that's how we got attacked.
So it's credential stuffing.
Yep.
Gotcha. Did they so do you know if they grabbed the password off of a breach site or?
No, it was not off of any type of exfiltration type scenario.
Okay.
It was literally just going in. And that's the thing that we're learning, with dwell times decreasing, right, significantly. I believe we saw 17 days from 2024 to 2025, right? It's no longer get in, move around inside the organization, elevation of privileges, moving laterally. It's smash and grab, right? It's harvest and decrypt, right? They're going to spend more time doing recon and less time inside the organization because we've gotten better at detecting threat actors inside the organization.
All right. Mackenzie, threats?
Oh, well,
Besides that one?
besides ransomware continues to be a threat for sure. And a lot of what we see with some of our customers that we bring on actually is they were previously hit with a ransomware attack even a year before. This is the second time that Clops released data site information. And granted, breach forums went down. We'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah.
They just switched over to
Back next
BitTorrent.
Onion site's still up.
Yeah. So a lot of the issues that we see when it comes to the ransomware is actually even getting some of the customers that come on with us in the networks we protect is kind of understanding, hey, we didn't know you were breached before, but I guess we're here to inform you. You have a week to pay or not pay. The problem is when your organization is posted on one of those data, hey, we're here to help, but we're going to release your data in X amount of days. There's usually two reasons that your name comes off of that. One, actual end user error, and the operator's messed up. That does happen, but they're not going to let you know that. I see what you mean. The next one, though, is that you pay the ransom. And so that brings me into the biggest concern I have, which was my bingo card of last year after the SolarWinds a few years ago, is we're due for some major supply chain attacks. And I think the Salesforce one most recently in the drift breach is probably the biggest one to pay attention to. Last week, they said that Salesforce is like, we're not paying the ransom, which, I'm sure former FBI would be like, exactly. I mean, we try to tell you, this is a business decision, but don't pay the ransom. They're just going to come back. But in this case, when you look at some of these supply chain attacks, you are now in third-party risk area. So the issue is now it's now bounced onto the person's data that, especially in this drift breach, which if you go to driftbreach.com, you can see all the affected companies to it and to what degree, and then they do their whole disclosure statement regarding to the degree that they were breached, if data was or was not taken. And there's a significant amount of data that was taken from that. And that is now saying, oh yeah, Salesforce, we're not paying. However, they've now pushed the pressure on to every single person, the other vendors whose data was still exposed. So we're going to see a lot more, I think, of some of these third-party risk management, vendor management issues that come around. The NPM one was also a good one to pay attention to. Basically, NPM are the node package modules that are on GitHub. A lot of them have been deemed malicious and embedded, and they are spread across a lot of software that everyone uses. And we're going to see certainly this level of supply chain that is the most concerning, because it's not just where do those NPM packages exist in software, it's what are developers continuing to put into the packages of their software that you're unaware of. And even the drift breach, that was from a GitHub account. And so these supply chain attacks are extremely concerning, because where do you follow the dollar amount? Who's liable? What happens? The data's already out there.
So Darren, just real quickly, in terms of evolving threats, let's not ignore the use of AI tools inside of our companies now, right? Everybody's got the chat GPT. So now the new threat is not only are attackers coming in and into our environments to get the data, we're giving them the data. we're exposing secrets in perhaps out there because we're using these Gen AI tools. We're also seeing inappropriate use of agentic tools where they're not properly configured, and it's leaving them exposed.
That's an interesting point. Let me ask all of you folks. How many of you have an AI policy in your business for how you can use AI policy? That's good. All right, thumbs up to that. That's big. That's a big improvement from the last time we did this. So thumbs up to that. Chris?
Another thing that we're seeing more of these days is data exfiltration, right? So in the beginning, ransomware was all about encrypting that data and then saying, pay us and we'll give you a key, right? Mm-hmm. Nowadays, they're focusing more and more on taking that data away from you. And that we think that's why the dwell times, as was mentioned, are lower, because they don't need to be in there that long. All they need is that critical data, that important data, which they will also try to ransom for you. And even if you don't pay, well, now we can sell said data.
Right, and that's called double extortion. They'll do the ransomware and they'll also extort you for your data. Like I said, I'm an expert witness on a bunch of cases, and not only is PII being stolen, but so is PHI, because they're looking for insurance companies, health insurance companies. And as an example of how bad it can be from a litigation perspective, MGM Hotels got hit 2 years ago or so. They just settled their data breach litigation without going to trial for $45 million. So that's how much that value was listed, which creates a cascading impact for when the next company gets breached and they're going to settle, they know that now that this is kind of where we're at. So just again, I say that just to keep that in mind because if you were to lose the data you possess, and it includes PII, PHI, there are lawyers out there that are going to want to say, hey, that's interesting. Then maybe we can sue that people.
Darren, you talk, and we'll move on, but you talk about the British company that lost everything.
Oh yeah, Knights of Old. That one.
Knights of
158-year-old logistics company in the UK got hit with a $1 million ransomware attack a year and a half ago. Couldn't pay for it. Went out of business. Lost everything.
Or didn't pay for it. And so where I was going to go with that is like, remember, the threat isn't just, it's not just about what you have, that might embarrass you. They just want to take your business now. They just ransom the business in your revenue stream.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like, hey, guess what? $1 million to me is a big deal. Whereas, to Old Knight, it was $100 million. All right. It's okay. Well, fine. The number of zeros changed in terms of maybe what the ransom would be, but it's still valuable in either, and can you recover or not? So,
go ahead.
There is some good news there. So IBM just published a big data breach research that I encourage you to go take a look at. There's some really good insights in there. But the good news is, I believe from last year to this year, or from 2000 to 2025, the number of organizations actually paying the ransom went down from like 64 to 59%. So a 6% change, which means we're getting more confident in not only our ability to detect early during that breach cycle, but also the ability to recover, because obviously the big bet in a ransomware attack is you're going to be able to recover. You're not going to be able to recover quick enough to offset the political fallout, right? I think the challenge, beyond the bright note there is it's still taking over 100 days to recover.
Yeah.
Right. So
probably down from over 200.
Sure. So one of the key things for companies to understand is kind of knowing what the threat is, understanding where those threats are coming from. So that's can sometimes be a cost perspective. So for small and medium-sized businesses, where can they get quality threat intelligence at little or no cost? And so, Bob, I'll direct this to you first, since you deal with the small companies anyway. So how do you get them the threat intelligence they need?
So there, some of you may have a partner like InfoSystems, or you're going to have channel partners, and often, quite frankly, they have access to research, threat intels, or threat intel feeds. If you're in healthcare, you do a high trust thing. High trust has stuff like that, as part of the subscription services. So look to your partners is one great way, because it often will integrate into your SOAR, your SIM. And the other is, the ISACs are great places for threat intel. And then I will tell you, you brought.
Hold on, Bob, before you get does everyone know what an ISAC is? Information sharing analysis. What's the C stand for? Yeah, no. Cooperative or something, whatever. But it's a big sharing entity for different industries. So
there's HISAC, there's FSISAC, financial services.
CISA.
Yeah. So those are So I would encourage look at your channel partners and look at some of the existing free services.
All right, let's move into strengthening your infrastructure and building resilience before the storm hits. In the analogy here, just as buildings must be reinforced to withstand hurricanes, companies need strong security foundations to survive a cyber attack. So Mackenzie, I'll direct this one to you first, and everybody else can chime in afterwards if they want. What foundational cybersecurity measures in 2025 are non-negotiable? What must you have if you want to say you have a resilient infrastructure?
I would say non-negotiable, and yet people are still negotiating it. And I hate to give some of these answers because they're going to be the obvious ones, right? MFA, EDR, least privilege applied, zero trust concepts applied, having recovery or restoration capabilities. All of that is non-negotiable, but you would be shocked to know how many people are still not doing MFA, how many people still are not implementing EDR and solely relying on built-in AV or whatever AV capabilities they have. And those are big issues. And the reason why I say it's a big issue is because we're still trying to spread the gospel to get people to get onto board and to really, not drink the Kool-Aid, but make the Kool-Aid and actually have some of these security controls in place. While in the meantime, threat actors are taking the time to decompile and understand how to bypass and evade said controls. This isn't me saying not to do it, but it is saying that these are non-negotiable. These are foundational. The way we see adversary in the middle attacks, the way that we are still dealing with brute force attacks and, like you said, credential stuffing. The identity has become the new perimeter for a few years now, and we haven't invested in some of the most basic features that need to be applied.
To add on to that, Mackenzie, we've talked about this, the fundamentals. The other thing that you have to, yes, MFA. And when you say MFA everywhere, that goes back to, do you know where all your identities are? Most of us don't. And so whether that's APIs or users and special users, right? Your break glass, your admins, all of that. So we've talked about this a lot. Fundamentals. You look at Darren's chart, right? It's a triangle. You cannot jump to the top of the pinnacle. You have to start at the bottom, and that's where you're dealing with fundamentals. Do I know where everything is? Do I know where my data is? My crown jewels, my children. Do I know where they are and what their value is? And do I know my identities? Do I know my devices? Because you've got great tools, or you can get great tools, but if your technology and those tools aren't in place, EDR, XDR tools, and the basic controls, then you might as well, you're going to leave the poster out, kick me.
So, Chris, Mackenzie mentioned zero trust. So how does adopting a zero trust architecture change a company's ability to withstand an attack? And in your opinion, it still seems to largely be a buzzword. Why isn't it more regularly deployed?
Zero trust architecture assumes that there's going to be a breach from the beginning. And so part of the reason why it's a buzzword is it's an architecture. It's a thought process, right?
Yeah.
It's not. And so there's so much uncertainty that some people have surrounding it. However, the most important is to apply and practice its different fundamentals. And so sometimes there are tools or software that help you identify hardening concepts and things like that, which will push you in the right direction, as well as performing a business impact analysis will help you identify those different things that was mentioned before. Where are those important assets that you have that you want to protect? What would happen if you didn't have this architecture in place, and you did have an event? What are the things that are most important to you? And then that'll allow you, once you have that analysis, to apply that zero trust architecture in a way that makes the most sense for your organization.
Yeah, I would say to tag on to that too, just remember when it comes to zero trust, outside of it's a concept, it's not a product. Right. So it's not something that is like a full-on control. And so people look at zero trust, like he was saying, as it's like a project that needs to be done, but it's really a phase of projects. So people are more trepidatious to actually approaching zero trust, and certainly thinking like, oh, this is just one giant project we have to invest a lot of resources in, versus the whole intent is to make it more difficult for attackers to laterally move throughout your environment. It's applying layered defense. It's focusing on identity. And so there are ways to approach it in phases that is not so overwhelming.
So, Richie, we've talked about supply chains here a little bit. So let's talk about what proactive steps can a company take to secure their supply chain, assuming they know what it is. They know their supply chain, especially with growing attacks on managed service providers.
Yeah, so I talk about this idea of a resiliency chain, right? Your ability to be resilient, right? And understanding there's a difference between recovery and resiliency, right? Resiliency is really the operational aspects, mitigating certain things or impacts to the organization, right? Data loss, right? And so as we make these decisions, we understand that each decision we make has an impact to the organization. And so I talk about this idea of resiliency chain, and you were asking about things that are a must, right? Understanding your resiliency chain is a must. Okay, it's not a technical solution. It's understanding that each one of the vendors, the partners that you do business with, impacts your ability to be successful when it comes to recovering quickly, right? If you take a look at your contracts, do you go through your contracts and look and see all the contracts that you've signed and ensure if they're a part of that resiliency chain that they must all have the same SLA agreements, right? If you have one organization that you work with that you depend on for recovery or resiliency, and they've got a 8x5 next business day response time, right? And you're dealing with an RTO, right, of hours, that's not going to work. That's going to bring your entire resiliency chain down. And so it's sitting down, looking at all your vendors, understanding how those links in that resiliency chain are dependent upon each other, and then ensuring, right, that all of your contracts are written to support your recovery time objective or your return to operation.
Yeah, sorry. So that it's to me, your point was great in that there's a business architecture side of this as well. When you're doing BCDR, think Change Healthcare. 85% of the market on claims, the claims processing, and many companies, doctors didn't get paid for 30 to 45 days because they had no way to process claims, because they had a once and done one solution. And so people had to find alternatives. So think about, so that's a business architecture, right? What do they do? We got to change. It's, best, fastest, cheapest, I mean, they're big. It's part of United Healthcare. What's going to happen? Well, now we see you need alternatives.
Right. All right. So now we've prepped for the storm. We've prepared for the storm. How do we respond to the storm when it happens? So this is obviously going to be incident response and business continuity. So the analogy here, emergency response teams have disaster plans. Businesses need incident response plans for cyber attacks. So Chris, let me start with you on this one. In the age of AI-driven attacks, what are the first critical steps when a breach is detected?
The first critical steps?
Yeah. In the first steps when we've got a problem, what do we do now?
So that's where it's so important to have that incident response plan identified, right? If you don't have that, then you're wondering. No one's going to know exactly what to do, okay? So I mentioned previously a business impact analysis. After that, you use that information to create your incident response plan, so that whenever you do have someone in your organization does encounter that first thing, it's already defined on what that process should be, and you're not after the fact trying to figure out what that process should be.
And print out your incident response plan, because if it's ransomware and your incident response plan is on a computer that's now encrypted, your incident response plan is useless. So
I'll add that any of those plans, should be not in a place that the attackers can get, right? Print it out and keep an offline copy.
Don't put your cyber insurance policy as well. That's probably a fun tip. Ransomware operators like to find those and gives them a good negotiable starting.
Knows how much you're paying to start with.
Yeah, so, I know what your limit is.
So Mackenzie, let me go with this one. So let me add. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
You guys touched on two good points, right? The incident response plan and then your insurance company, right? I don't care how good an incident response plan you put together. Who do you think's determining how that incident response plan gets carried out? It's your insurance company, right? There's a lot of things that we would have loved to have told our customers as they're asking about what's going on. Insurance company is going to tell you everything you can do, everything you can't do, and the steps that you need to get through to be able to do those things that you want to do. So having that incident response plan agreed upon by the insurance company is going to save you a lot of time in terms of negotiating that cyber event.
I actually have a fun question on that point. Who do you guys think you're supposed to call first if you have an actual like determined right of boom incident? Is it your lawyer or your cyber insurance person?
How many people say lawyer? How many people say cyber insurance? How many don't know and hope we have an answer?
Who doesn't have a lawyer? How many don't have cyber insurance? or a
Your
lawyer?
investment broker, actually.
It's your lawyer. It should be your lawyer because while insurance is important, they're going to give you breach counsel and they're going to help push you towards an IR team. It's really important to have your own general counsel. I don't know if we talked about this last time. We might have mentioned it. I feel like I always throw this out randomly because we've talked about it. I went and did a presentation with a lawyer and we played a big tabletop game. And no one could really decide who they would call first. So I'll just put it: the cyber lawyer told the people to call a cyber lawyer. That lawyers are good for that reason.
And then
Yeah,
your
because-
financial advisor after that.
Because the insurance companies have their payouts at their best interest, and your lawyer has your company in their best interest, in your best interest. And I'll tell you a great example of. And I don't know that there was a big fight with all of this, but so how many people have Facebook accounts? Probably most everybody. Why do you use Facebook? Facebook was breached in 2021. No one looks back at that because they actually handled it really, really well. And the key with what Facebook did was be transparent. They were super out front with everybody of and in a timely manner. I've argued with the insurance companies about disclosure. It's like, look, everybody's under attack. Almost everybody is going to be breached. So having a policy of transparency builds trustworthiness and integrity with your client base, which is ultimately the thing that you've got to protect is your clients, their information, of course, your reputation that goes along with it.
And your lawyer reviews that transparency message.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Mackenzie, you mentioned tabletops. Let's focus on it a little bit. What role should a tabletop exercise and simulated AI-enabled attacks play in IR preparation?
Oh, yeah. So this is the first I've heard kind of the AI simulated tabletops, but I always tell people I just used to do way too many tabletops. I did my tour of duty. I'm done doing tabletops. It's too many there. And a lot of people don't remember. So there's different ways you can approach a tabletop. And I think the AI simulation or AI based scenario are super helpful because you can build into your prompts based on what sector you're in, what type of category of like attack or threat vector you're looking at. And I'm sure you can say, hey, can you reflect these public breaches? Like there's so much you could probably do to build out actionable simulations, and they should be performed really regularly with not just your IT and security team, but with your executive leadership, with different lines of business. All of that's super valuable. And then the other thing that is really valuable is post-mortem lessons learned. Let's go back and tabletop this. People always forget to do those two things. You want to say, okay, what is in the realm of possibility? And I think with inclusion of now AI advancement, we can, in fact, really make accurate scenarios that would be helpful. But also going back to what is likely already happened to you, even if it was an incident that, say, your MDR provider picked up and it got to lateral movement and maybe got close to data exfil but didn't execute, go back and review that type of information. Look at the accounts that were compromised, look at the hosts, look at how they were able to gain initial access, and then repeat it and walk through it and see really if you didn't have MDR or if a step was missed, what was that plan? So I think the combination of using AI for what is in the realm of possible, and then also use what's already happened to you to kind of go back through your diary and go through it again.
And use AI to do the retro.
Yes, yes.
Chris.
As we all use AI for that nowadays.
It'll also help you find out the things that don't work or don't work as you expected, right? You may or may not have heard of. Years back, Netflix wrote this tool that periodically went around and broke their infrastructure on purpose, so that they could fix it in an automated fashion. You're using AI to generate these scenarios. Try to think of things that the unknown, essentially, what you wouldn't be able to catch on your own. And by running through these things, you can further perfect that process.
So Richie, since you bravely mentioned you guys had an incident, did your incident planning, incident or tabletopping or incident response planning prior to that help with the actual incident when it occurred?
No comment.
Okay. Was there a post-mortem to fix it going forward?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, fair enough. You want to go any further than that? Okay, we'll keep it at that. All right. So, Bob, let me ask you this one. So, company has an incident. How do they ensure their communications during the crisis is contained within trusted sources when the information may be about to get out there for everybody to know?
That
And
never happens.
what's a good communication plan for when you have an
Yeah.
incident?
All right. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I was
Yeah,
badly
so-
worded.
No, that's good. No, that's okay. Sometimes, like me, I use too many words. And
Yeah. I read ahead. I read ahead on my question. It was not what it was supposed to be.
So yeah, first of all, right, having your, we talked about having your communication plan well defined, and ready and set, and not just in the archive but printed. Number one, but number two, right, having multiple trusted communication channels. Great, you're compromised on your O365, but do you still have Slack, right? Do you have non-compromised channels? The other thing is, don't be afraid to go analog, if you will, right? And I say analog, maybe it is that there are EBS or EBS, emergency broadcast type of communication channels and tools that can also be used. I was part of Cigna. We used one. We had 110,000 associates. As part of employment, you needed a communication method like a phone number or email, and there was chat back. One, I got the message, to whatever, or I'm safe. Right, hurricanes and other types of events. You need to do the same thing. So having multiple alternatives, secure, trustworthy communication channels, and of course having your communication plan in place.
So go ahead, Richie.
Yeah. So the other thing to understand is, there is going to be litigation. There is going to be insurers involved, that is going to dictate what you can and cannot do corporately, right? But to the point made here, you've got feet on the street, right? There's a lot of things that you can communicate to your customers, to your partners by word of mouth, right? And although it's not great, right, it's the best you got, right? One of the big things that I was challenged with is helping our customers to understand, they're like, hey, we're seeing that you've got a lot of applications that still haven't been restored yet, right? And in fact, we actually set world records in terms of our ability to restore, right? But there's a huge difference between restoring an application and returning it to operations, right? And it's all the hardening, the triage, the isolation techniques that you need to implement, other remediation tasks, right? So just recovering an application or a system is one thing, right? Now I've got a whole lot of work to do out of an abundance of caution, right? Before I return those applications to their production networks. And it's important to communicate that to your customers and partners. Just because that application is not back online does not mean that it has not been restored, right? And so a great way to be able to communicate that, right, is by word of mouth, right? Leveraging your employees, helping them to understand how to communicate that and how to communicate that effectively.
And one other thing I'll note, that because no one's mentioned it here, contact law enforcement. Now
That's good.
And your lawyer.
FBI, Secret Service, whoever's your preferred law enforcement entity of choice. The reason being because they can help you with several things that you may not have thought of. They may be able to help say, hey, we've seen this before. Here's how you can remediate it out. Here's things we've learned from it. Maybe we have the decryption key. They could have the decryption key. It's hard to say. But you want to contact them because they will not come in and take all your stuff. They're not going to take all your computers and all your networks. They're going to come in with as small footprint as possible. And it's better to know who your local FBI person is before an incident rather than after. And I'll give you an example of this. When I was a supervisor in the Birmingham field office, a CIO called me from a company and said, hey, I was given your name by a friend of mine who knows you personally, and I had a call from a guy who said he was a cyber agent on the cyber squad in Birmingham, and he wanted to talk to me. And I just wanted to confirm he was who he was. And I said, yes, he's a cyber agent, and he probably has information that's important to your company. So I said, okay, thank you. 2 days later, hadn't contacted the agent back. So the supervisor of the squad contacted the CIO because we had intelligence that showed that a ransomware group was planting files on the company's system. We could actually see it happening, and we said, here's where the files are, here's how to take them off, here's how to prevent this from being bad. So the agent called, they called me, supervisor called, didn't believe any three of us, decided to email the special agent in charge of the Birmingham division to confirm all three of us were who we said we were. Mind you, their network was compromised, but they sent the email from the network that was compromised. Showed up the next morning, the entire system was encrypted. So I say all that to say know who that person is, because no matter where you live, if you're in Chattanooga, there's an FBI office here. They're all part of the Nashville field office, but if you're in Knoxville, there's a Knoxville folks, Nashville folks, Memphis folks, wherever you are, and they will come and give you free presentations. If you want to scare your employees, and you say, hey, come scare my employees about cyber threats, they'll come. What's that?
Your executives.
Yeah, exactly. They'll come and say, here's the threat specifically to your industry. So they'll do it for free. They will come and talk to you. So reach out to them, know who they are, because they do change periodically too. So, and then it's part of their mission. So with that, let's move to what do you do after this? So it's all happened. How do you build stronger? Because after a natural disaster, communities build stronger. How can businesses do the same after a cyber attack? So Chris, I'll head this down to you. What are the most common mistakes a company still makes in the aftermath of a cyber attack or an incident?
They act too quickly. And what I mean by that is the thought is to immediately let's restore our data, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, before you restore the data, there's several things that you have to make sure of, right? You're going to be restoring in another environment, because typically that source environment is going to be part of litigation, and maybe FBI is involved in there as well, right? But you need to find out what the source of it was, okay? Then that you're not going to just immediately restore. You need to verify that the backups you have are good backups that are clean. So you need to be able to scan those backups. You need to be able to find validate, okay, we're good, okay, and then you can restore those into that clean environment. If you try to jump the gun, and I'm sure that there's other examples here too, you're going to find yourself re-encrypted or just in the same boat that you were to begin with, because you didn't follow through the due diligence because you wanted to rush.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely add in, IR experience that we want to make sure that when we're coming in to do an investigation, we're simultaneously involving a compromise recovery team that's going to be a part of those restoration activities, because they're separate. But yet we still have to communicate the whole time as we have people hunting and investigating. They're finding new artifacts, whether it's a web shell or a back door or something that would potentially be like initial access brokerage fund stuff. You want to find all of those Easter eggs, essentially, because restoration is now going to have to focus, when they're doing recovery, that they're recovering again to a safe image, a golden image, or that the golden image was impacted as well, because threat actors can be, especially sophisticated ones, they like to do a lot of tricky things, and containment is important. But yeah, I couldn't agree more on don't restore too fast.
There's a great sports analogy here, right? You've been watching your favorite basketball, football, soccer team, right? And they'll generally say, oh, look, they're really exploiting the run game, or they're really exploiting, the defense's, secondary, right? And they're going to continue to do it until the defense can prove, right, that they can change and stop whatever that offense is doing really well. And we see the same thing in breaches, right? They're going to continue to attempt to exploit or leverage a variant of that same exploit to get you, right? Until you can prove that you can stop it, right? And so we see most of the vicious attacks, right, generally on those follow-up attempts, right? They tried to shut the door. They failed to do the necessary in order to mitigate the threat. And it was either by way of a variant or a follow-on attack of the same. And so the one thing that we try to stress is after you've gone through the process of recovery, triage, hardening of those systems, before you return them to operations, that you reprotect them. It's so simple. There's a lot of great technologies out there to help you do that. Veeam's got some really great tools that we love. But far too often, they go through this whole process to harden these systems before they reconnect them to the production networks, and they fail to do the last step, right? That last mile, which is re-protecting those systems. Because if you do not get everything out, right, that needed to be removed, you're starting over from scratch, right? So at least if I take those systems that I've recovered, I harden them, I protect them, I re-protect them, right? Snapshotting technologies, what have you, right? Very easy technologies. Then if you have to begin that process over again because you didn't remove everything, you're not starting at ground zero, right? You're at least starting at 80, 90, 97%, right? So that's one of the biggest things that we see with.
So I'm going to follow up on this with you because, again, your company has gone through this, but how does a business turn an attack into a competitive differentiator by demonstrating transparency and resilience to their clients and the regulators?
Well, we're still working on that. I'm actually part of a group right now that's working on it. We talked about it internally and we said, hey, you know what? We learned a lot this process, right? A lot of things that I think it means more, right? When you can share from experience, right? You know, whether you've been through a divorce, whether you've had, you know, children that didn't turn out maybe the way that you thought they would, right? You know, it's like going from your first graduation reunion to your 30th, right? We've all been there by the 30th, right? You kind of come with a little pomp and stance, your first and second reunion. And so you kind of let down that guard and you say, hey, you know, let us slide over to the same side of the table as you are, right? Put our, you know, arm around you and tell you what we've learned, right? And it means more. So we're in the process of actually putting together what we feel is going to be like one of the most open documents in terms of the lessons that we've learned, but it's a process, right? I mean, we're still not there. We're fully restored. Legal is still involved in terms of what we can and can't do. And so that's the biggest thing, right? Is, hey, you know, even if you wanted to, what's, you know, and that goes into that political fallout, right? You know, how long does it take you to turn that into a net positive?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I guess we're about 9 months out. Maybe not even that long, 6, 7 months out. And so we're still doing it, right? So it's a long, arduous process.
You know, I alluded to it earlier, right? How do you build trust and trust with your constituents? It's going to be through transparency. Again, everybody's under attack, and so the winners are, Darren, I think, are going to be the companies that, you know, regardless of how much time it takes, they demonstrate transparency to their constituents, to their stakeholders. You know, again, I look. Facebook, right? Everybody still does Facebook. You know, they didn't do a name change. They didn't do a rebrand. It's Facebook. And everybody's information was pretty much compromised. So how did they do that, right? They did it through, you know, they were very transparent with what happened and how they recovered. I think post-change healthcare, United has done an okay job, and they're, you know, and right, you look at the companies that can sustain those types of events and that come back, and you still trust them. While it wasn't a cyber type event, I think CrowdStrike, you know, really bad couple of days there for a lot of companies, and yet, right? And no offense to anybody, any inventors, but CrowdStrike Falcon is still considered, you know, perhaps the best XDR tool in the marketplace. And so people still trust them. Well, I was chatting with another CISO about this, and I said, so what do you think about that? And he says, well, they're most likely the most secure and the most disciplined, because the next time it happens, they won't exist. So, but if you look at it, they learned their lessons. They were transparent. Here's what happened. Here's what we're doing about it. They've changed their development process. And I think, quite frankly, that's why a lot of us are now so focused on third-party integrations in the supply chain.
So I'm going to give this one to anybody can answer. This is the last question. We'll get into one thought you all have, and then we'll have your questions. So whoever wants to pop this off to start with, one of the things we haven't talked about, but it always comes up whenever we talk cybersecurity, is training. So awareness training, all that kind of stuff, right? Most companies still do the PowerPoint once a year kind of thing. And if cybersecurity awareness training was working, we wouldn't have all the incidents we're seeing, it would seem. And so is there a better way to do it? What's the better, if you got your king for a day, you're going to come up with, this is how cyber training is going to be done. How would you do it? Who wants it?
I don't mean to dominate. You
just got a car.
What's that?
You just got a car, so we understand.
That's right. I did. So I can, yeah, exactly. Real life, true example. So I ran training education awareness for Cigna, for 2.5 years. When we started, we had a 20% click rate, on those associates, and we got it down to sub 2%. Still a lot. So here's what happened, right? It was quarterly tests. We went to, right. You know all the answers, right? You do it more frequently. You use good content. We use targeted attacks. None of this misspelled words, right? Because none of that's legit. One of the and I'll stop with this. One of the things I would encourage you to do is make sure your data is good. Publish your data. Gamification at a very senior level was super insightful to get people to pay attention to the training. So Dave Cordani is the CEO of Cigna. We were able to get phishing click rates by senior, executive VP. These are people with like 7-figure salaries. It was like you had 8 or 9 of those people. The key is with good trusted data that was presented to them on a monthly basis, no executive wanted to be on the bottom of the list. Mm-hmm. So that's all you had to manage to was the bottom, because everybody would work their way up. So that was number one. But number two, what we discovered in this moved the needle in terms of education and awareness was we actually had interviews with people who were multiple clickers. We would interview their department and find out, like, what's the deal? Are you just stupid? Or do you not care? Are you, just serious? Just like, so it turns out, some of the insightful stuff, like with some contact center folks, it was like, no, you need to understand, my job is to open emails and click links. It's in my work procedure. I get measured by how many emails I open and how many links, because that's my job. So what we found out was, we had to get the business to rewrite some of their business procedures. And so fundamentally it changed. We had people who were clicking on 7 links, over the course of, they would fail 7 times. They were on the brink of getting fired. So Trey, what I would encourage is, don't think about it as there's not a single answer. It's a programmatic approach, and you can make real inroads. Because what I believe, and I think a lot of us believe, is maybe your greatest weakness, but your greatest strength can be your employee base, because they are the force multiplier. So invest in training, education, and awareness, not just in the user population, but in your technical staff, developers.
And I would take it even beyond that, right? I think we're seeing more manufacturing exploits, especially just in the past year. And it obviously ties into supply chain. So, don't just think of your productivity worker, your business workers. Think of the folks that are in your manufacturing facilities, that may not be your typical IT worker, and help them to understand they have just as much of a responsibility. We talk about this idea of corporate resiliency, right? It's shared up and down the organization, across departments. It's physical security, so it includes janitors, all the way up to board of trustees and C-level folks, right? So understand training is not just something that we put together, send a link out, tell them to sit it as part of their yearly update, but also consider the audience and how the depth and breadth of that audience.
Going to mention it, in conjunction with the gamification and making sure your data is good. Use simulated phishing links because we don't always know. I mean, you can't always tell that your data is good from the actual phishing links, right? Because there might be some that just you didn't have visibility to. But having that plan in phase so that you're sending simulated phishing links, you're able to clearly identify the worst offenders, as was mentioned.
Right.
So you can focus on that.
Cool. So now I'll open it up to you folks. Any questions that we have not covered that you would like answered, since you have a captive audience? Anyone? InfoSystems said if you ask a question, you get a car. I heard that. No? No questions. Okay, fair enough. Feel free to ask us any questions afterwards if you want. We'll be around. One last thought. So everybody, one last thought to take away. What's the key thing people should take away from this as they move forward? Richie? Okay, or want me to start with Chris and come back to you?
The buzzer.
All right, Chris, go ahead.
I mean, a lot of what we've talked about today has to do with like preparing yourselves and whatnot, and recognizing incursion events and what to do. Something near and dear to my heart is having your, disaster recovery plan a part of that cyber plan, right? And that's not just knowing what you're going to do and testing it and making sure your backups are valid and things like that, but putting the architecture in at the beginning to try to secure yourselves as best possible, right? I'm sure many of you have heard of the 3-2-1, three restore points, 2 copies of your data, 1 offsite, and if you enact these, which your backup software in conjunction with a really good storage vendor can enable for you, then you can make sure that the backups, when you do have a cyber event, that you're ready and you can actually recover from your backups.
I'll build off of that, right? So I take 3-2-1 and I turn it into 3-2-2-1-0, and I know you know what the 0 is, right? So, and I ask this to every customer, right? I see some elaborate plans for what their, IDP is going to look like, what their recovery strategy is going to look like. If you don't test it, it doesn't matter what you write down. It doesn't matter how good it sounds in your head until you can test it with 0 errors, right? There's no level of confidence by your C-suite that you're going to be able to recover as you say you are. And that ability to prove that out and to show them that you can do it without errors is what keeps them ultimately for having a high level of confidence around not paying that ransom. And then the 2 I would add in there is not necessarily 2, but multiple levels of scanning, right? Scan that data as it comes into your organization before you do anything with it, before you back it up, before you replicate it. Scan that data as it goes into your backup environment. Scan that data as it lands in your IRE or your vault solution, right? The more shots that you get at that data, right? And every vendor uses their own form of scanning, whether it's signature-based, entropy-based, file validation-based. You get more cracks at that to identify it with multi-level scanning.
Mackenzie?
Yeah. I mean, not to beat a dead horse, since there's a lot of information, right? We've talked about AI, we've talked about policy, we've talked about incident response, we've talked about threat intelligence, we've talked about disaster recovery and backups and security awareness training. I think the advice that I leave people to take away is continue to come to events like this. But most importantly is it becomes really overwhelming when you feel like you have 20 pages of notes. Pick 2 things that you can accomplish today, right? It's the same concept that we talked about with zero trust. It's all in phases. It's improvement. It's little things. And yes, cybersecurity is continuous. And incident response is also a continuous life cycle. So when it comes to these types of events and the things we've talked about, you know, whether you're going home and you're going to pull in all the feeds for CISA or MSI ISAC, or do a third-party risk management and say, hey, I want a list of all of our vendors tomorrow, and I want us to go through and see if they're all SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. Or heck, just go do a testing of your backups and see who has access and what your hot and cold storage looks like. Anything, just write down 1 to 2 things that you know you've learned today and take it back. That would be my bit of advice.
Thank you.
That's great. And just, and I would do that if you know where your children are. So
They're going to say call a lawyer.
yeah, exactly. No, what I mean, so the thing is your fundamentals. You have to know where your servers, your people, your identities, your data. Right? If you know what you have, then you can design the protections around it, and then you can decide what's important to recover. To back up, to recover. What's critical to the business. So if you have not done that, to me, that's step one, is just make sure from a fundamental perspective, you know where all of your assets are.
All right. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, InfoSystems, for putting this on. Anything, Keith? Yeah, last thing?